This is a reading of the main argument of an Aristotelian dialogue concerning the geocentric and heliocentric cosmologies, Contra Galileo, which I am the author of and which you can find a copy of in the archive and Amazon links below. Again, I wrote this as a response to Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, as a defense of the Aristotelian and Ptolemaic geocentric model of the cosmos, and as a refutation of the heliocentric model of the cosmos, as portrayed especially by Galileo, since he was the most important figure of the scientific revolution. Now, what follows will be the main argument and complete disproof of the heliocentric model. The proving the impossibility of the Earth's motion, that it is impossible for the Earth to move around the sun, and that the sun has to, by necessity, move around the Earth. Not an argument from probability and improbability. A complete disproof that it is impossible for the Earth to move around the sun. Taken from Aristotle's On the Heavens and expanded upon, as Aristotle made that argument as a disproof of that being impossible, the Earth's motion being completely impossible because it results in contradictions. But Aristotle's proof was very brief, as he thought that was sufficient. And as there has been great confusion about this, I found the necessity to expand upon that. Essentially, this argument is from Aristotle's On the Heavens. And will be a complete disproof, end of story, that it is impossible for the Earth to be moving around the sun or anything else. And that the Earth has to, by necessity, be stationary at the center, and that everything else is moving around the Earth. End of story. To begin, Simplicius of Cilicia. That then is my response to your problems posed against the theory of the Earth's immobility and stationary nature. Now, I will in turn pose problems against your claim that the Earth is in motion. Notice this. You say that the theory of a moving Earth and motionless heavenly spheres is capable of accounting for the same phenomena as does the theory of the motion of the heavens and the immobility of the Earth. According to you, both theories are able to explain the same apparent motion. From there, you rely on probability and improbability, never proving or even arguing for the impossibility of the Earth's motionlessness and stationary nature, and never proving the necessity of the Earth's motion. We, however, don't admit that any movement of the Earth can account for the same celestial phenomena as the immobility of the Earth, along with the movement of the heavenly spheres. So instead of relying on arguments from probability and improbability, like some menial gambler, I will argue against even the possibility of the mobility of the Earth, against even the possibility of the Earth being movable, in accounting for the relevant celestial phenomena, and for the necessity of the stationary nature and immobility of the Earth, and the necessity of the movement of the heavenly spheres, if the relevant celestial phenomena can be accounted for at all. I won't rely on probability and improbability at all. And I will reduce the problem to terms of impossible or necessary. I have presumably escaped the difficulties you set to me regarding the probability or improbability of the Earth's motion and of the Earth's immobility. You haven't, however, set forth a single argument that the motion of the heavenly spheres is impossible, or that the immobility of the Earth is impossible, or that the motion of the Earth is necessary, or that the immobility of the heavenly spheres is necessary. I, however, along with the philosopher, as some call him, or as we do, the daimonical Aristotle, wish to argue that the mobility of the Earth is impossible, and that the immobility of the heavenly spheres is impossible, and that the immobility and stationary nature of the Earth is necessary, and that the mobility and movement of the heavens is necessary. I need but one argument to prove this, yet subsequent arguments will fall into place behind the marshalling first, in proportion to the divergence of views you possibly hold regarding the type of movement you ascribe to the Earth. As the daimonical Aristotle wrote in his lecture notes, everything that moves with the circular movement, except the first sphere of fixed stars, is observed to be past and to move with more than one motion. The Earth then also, whether it moves along a circumference around the center or set at the center revolves around its own center, must necessarily move with two motions to account for the phenomena. But if this were so, there would have to be passings and turnings of the fixed stars, yet no such thing is observed. The same stars always rise and set in the same parts of the Earth. Regarding this quotation, you know that he wants to reject two positions, as you agree and you mention in your dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. That of those who place the Earth at the center and make it move upon itself about its own center, while the other belongs to those who, placing the Earth distant from the center, would make it move through a circumference circularly around some other center, around something else. Both of these positions he jointly opposes with the same argument. Don't you have your characters in your dialogue mention that verbatim? Galileo. Yes, those are the views that Aristotle opposes in the relevant passage. Simplicius of Cilicia. Let us consider the first position, which places the Earth at the center and has it rotate around its own center. Again, he says, as you quote, all the circularly moving bodies seem to lag behind and to move with more motions than one, except the sphere of the fixed stars, that is the primum mobile. Therefore, the Earth, moving around its own center and being placed at the center, must be moved with two motions and must fall behind in order to account for the relevant phenomena. But if this were the case, the risings and settings of the fixed stars would have to vary, which is not seen to happen. Therefore, the Earth is not moved. Since this argument needs to be unraveled, I will pose the questions to you in a simpler manner, about which if you don't answer in the appropriate manner, I will answer for you. So to begin, if the cause of the apparent risings and settings over the horizons of the luminaries and fixed stars is not caused by any revolving of the heavenly spheres, but the turning of the Earth about its center, then the positions of the sun and moon and planets would not vary in relation to the zodiac of the fixed stars, but would likewise remain fixed to the rest of the constellations. Is that right? Galileo. Yes. Simplicius of Cilicia. However, they do vary in relation to the fixed stars, as they each transit the zodiacal belt by their own separate motions completed in different amounts of time. Then, since the sun and moon and planets each change their position as regards to the fixed stars and the zodiac signs, and these motions and their change of position differ from the diurnal motion that we have hypothesized as caused by the motion of the Earth, instead of that of the outermost sphere of fixed stars. Their motions can't be attributed to the rotation of the Earth. Do you agree? Galileo, I agree. Simplicius of Cilicia, you must agree. For you said that, but on the other hand, it is indeed just as necessary that the motion in question display itself very generally in all other visible bodies and objects, which being separated from the earth, do not take part in this movement. So the true method of investigating whether any motion can be attributed to the earth, and if so, what it may be, is to observe and consider whether bodies separated from the earth exhibit some appearance of motion which belongs equally to them all. For a motion which is perceived only, for example, in the moon, and which does not affect Venus or Jupiter or any of the stars, cannot in any way be the Earth's or anything but the moon's. Then, since the motions of the sun and moon and the planets through the zodiacal signs cannot be accounted for by the motion of the Earth, or for that matter, the daily risings and settings carried around by the fixed stars, the Earth must be moved with two motions in order to account for that phenomena, as Aristotle makes a point to say. He adduces that from the observation that everything that moves with circular movement, except the first sphere, is observed to be passed and to move with more than one motion. By passings, he means that the other circularly moving bodies pass each other through the same zodiacal course, and that they also move with a variety of motions, sometimes turning back in a retrograde and sometimes continuing forward. That is all to prove that there are necessarily two motions at least that the earth would have to be subject to, if it is to account for the apparent movements of the celestial bodies. Galileo, I follow so far. Simplicius of Cilicia. The argument doesn't stop there. However, you say that the people that hold that opinion about the earth rotating about its own center, in order to account for the apparent motion of the heavenly bodies, that, quote, they don't attribute to the earth any motion but that one by which all the stars appear to be moving from east to west. That is unmistakably your claim, which I reference, since you said elsewhere, make the earth the prima mobile, that is, make it revolve upon itself in 24 hours in the same way as all the other spheres. Then, without its imparting such a motion to any other planet or star, all of them will have their risings, settings, and in a word, all their other appearances. Again, Galileo says, make the earth the prima mobile, that is, make it revolve upon itself in 24 hours in the same way as all the other spheres. Then, without its imparting such a motion to any other planet or star, all of them will have their risings and settings, and in a word, all of their other appearances. We, however, will continue. After having established that the position they hold requires the earth to move with more than one motion to account for the relevant phenomena. There is then the motion of separate luminaries in relation to and through the course of the fixed stars that is not attributable to the hypothesized single rotation of the earth, as those are also not attributable to the daily cyclical rotation of the fixed stars, which is what the other hypothesized rotation of the earth about its center is meant to account for. Is that much clear to you? Galileo, yes. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then we can relinquish the arguments you set against the theory of a stationary earth by reducing the many movements of the heavenly spheres to a single rotary motion of the earth around itself while positioned at the center of the cosmos. To continue then with the argument, answer this. If a second motion is to be attributed to the earth, besides that which is hypothesized to account for the daily risings and settings, and this second motion of the earth is supposed to account for the motion of the planets and sun and moon through the zodiacal constellations, mustn't the earth be thought to move in the opposite direction from the first motion hypothesized? Galileo, you mean to account for the west to east motion of the planets, sun and moon? Simplicius, yes. As you say that the apparent east to west rising and setting motion of the heavens is accounted for by the hypothesized movement of the earth from west to east, wouldn't you require the earth to move in its second motion from east to west in order to account for the motion of the planets from west to east through the zodiac? Galileo, I suppose so, although I am not in a position to defend the theory, as I primarily have intended to defend the heliocentric model of Copernicus, not the geocentric model that has the earth turn about its center. Simplicius of Cilicia, then I don't know who will. Still, you must answer, or I will answer for you. Galileo, okay. Simplicius of Cilicia, then could the earth move from west to east and from east to west at the same time? Or would that hypothesis require rather that the earth would have to pause its motion from west to east, which accounts for the daily risings and settings, to advance in the opposite direction from east to west to account for the planetary motions through the zodiac? Galileo, if that is the meaning of this theory, then the two motions couldn't occur simultaneously, but would have to be consecutively interchangeable. Then would have to be consecutive interchangeably. Simplicius of Cilicia, then tell me, upon the earth changing its motion from eastward to westward, wouldn't the stars that had just risen over the eastern horizon sink back down over the same horizon? And wouldn't the stars that most recently set over the western horizon rise back up over the same horizon at the onset of the consecutive motion? Galileo, that would make sense. Simplicius of Cilicia, but as the daimonical Aristotle says, there is no variation observed amongst the risings and settings of the fixed stars, and they have but one continuous, uninterrupted motion, unlike the diverse motions of the planets. Galileo, then such would not be the case. Simplicius of Cilicia, well, then set aside that interpretation of the second motion of the earth required to account for the planetary motions west to east through the zodiac. I know not what other directional motion of the earth would feign to account for the planetary motions in the opposite direction of the risings and settings of the daily revolving cycle of the fixed stars. However, there would beyond that be required a third motion of the earth to account for the slight variation north and south of the sun and each of the other luminaries in their path through the zodiacal belt, as the path of the ecliptic runs oblique to the equatorial latitude. Then the earth would have to revolve slightly north and south as well, would it not? Galileo, I suppose so. Simplicius of Cilicia, well, any revolving of the earth north or south would result in a shift in the equatorial latitude in relation to the celestial equator, would it not? And the latitudes of the earth would discontinue to be aligned with the coordinates of the celestial latitudes, wouldn't they? And perhaps Aristotle means this when he says that there would have to be passings and turnings of the fixed stars, yet no such thing is observed. The same stars always rise and set over the same parts of the earth, that is, at the same lines of latitude. Galileo, yes, that would be the result. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then the conclusion is that if for the motion of the earth to account for the diverse motions of celestial bodies, one westward completing its cycle in 24 hours and many eastward completing their cycles in a diverse range of much slower times, the earth would have to move with more than one motion. And that any additional motion of the earth on top of the first hypothesis that was meant to account for the daily risings of and settings would disrupt the continuity between the points of latitude and cause stars to rise and set at different latitudinal degrees. But the same stars rise and set in the same parts of the earth. Then the conclusion is that the motion of the earth cannot possibly account for the apparent and diverse motions of the heavenly bodies. So, the hypothesis of the earth revolving around its own center at the center of the cosmos results in impossibilities and must be abandoned. Galileo, yes, according to the argument. I, however, don't hold that view. Simplicius of Cilicia. Nonetheless, that position is half of the opposition against the contradictory hypothesis that we hold, that the earth is stationary and unmoving. For now, we have settled what I consider to be half the problem, whether or not the earth, if positioned at the center of the cosmos, is motionless or revolves around its own center. The result being that the earth, if positioned at the center of the cosmos, must not only be stationary, but then also, of course, the apparent motion of the heavenly bodies must be due to the heavenly bodies themselves. Now we can proceed to the second half of the problem, which can be put thus: whether or not the sun moves around the earth or the earth moves around the sun. Whether the sun moves around the earth or the earth moves around the sun. For that will be enough for our part, if we sufficiently prove that the earth doesn't move around the sun, after proving that the earth doesn't rotate around its own center at the center of the cosmos, the result being that the earth must be motionless and that the sun and other celestial bodies must move in circles around it. So tell me, Galileo, is the earth's axis fixed to the northern celestial pole as regards to the annual cycle in question or not? Galileo, I say that the axis of the earth is fixed indeed to the northern celestial pole, at least as can be noticed during the course of a great multitude of years. Simplicius of Cilicia. And the fixed stars rise and set at the same latitudes north and south invariably, do they not? Galileo, that is also true. Simplicius of Cilicia. And do you agree that the sun's apparent motion along its eastward course through the ecliptic has a slight variation of about 23 degrees of latitude north of the celestial equator, and the same degree of divergence south of the equatorial line, according to the change of seasons on the earth, accounting for the change of seasons on the earth? Galileo, yes, that is correct. Simplicius of Cilicia. Now, either the motion of the earth or the motion of the sun must be responsible for the apparent variation of the position of the sun, along with the corresponding change of seasons. Do you agree? And is not that the immediate problem at hand? Galileo, yes, inevitably, the motion of the earth or the sun must be responsible for the apparent variation in position of the sun, both its diversions north and south and its apparent course through the zodiacal signs. Simplicius of Cilicia. But there is no variation northward or southward between the earth and the fixed stars. For the stars at certain celestial latitudes always rise and set at the same terrestrial latitudes, invariably, right? Galileo, that is right. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then the Earth's axis doesn't tilt in divergence from the northern celestial pole, not throughout the course of the annual solar cycle, but remains aligned to the celestial poles. Galileo, I suppose you're right. Simplicius of Cilicia. Yet the sun rises and sets at different latitudes, variously throughout the course of a year, straying south of the equatorial line in the winter months and north of the equatorial line in the summer months. Do you agree? Galileo, yes. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then, if the axis of the earth doesn't tilt or diverge in any way from the celestial poles, but the position of the sun changes in variation north and south in relation to both the celestial and terrestrial latitudes, verging past the equatorial line towards the northern celestial pole in the summer and towards the southern celestial pole in the winter. Then the sun must be responsible for its variation of position in relation to both the latitudinal lines of the earth and the latitudinal lines of the heavens alike. Galileo, perhaps. Simplicius of Cilicia, perhaps. We agreed that the earth doesn't tilt from alignment with the celestial poles. Galileo, what if I consider the celestial poles as relative to the spin of the earth and not the natural axis of the cosmos? Simplicius of Cilicia, then I will simplify the argument for you. I neither think you believe that, nor that you pose a legitimate obstacle for the argument. There are three variables to consider the relationships between: the celestial latitudes, along with the rising and setting of their corresponding stars, the terrestrial latitudes, and the sun's varying position along celestial or terrestrial latitudes. I say that if the sun's apparent varying position relative to the earth along celestial latitudes has to be attributed to either the motion of the earth or the motion of the sun, but the relationship between celestial and terrestrial latitudes is constant, and the earth couldn't tilt or move north or south without disrupting the invariant relationship between the celestial and terrestrial latitudes. Then the earth has no northern or southern motion in relation to the fixed stars and therefore anything else. And the variant position of the sun northward and southward of the equatorial line cannot be attributed to the tilting or any other motion of the earth, which has its axis fixed to the celestial poles. Or again, as the angular position of the sun along lines of latitudes is variant, sometimes more north, sometimes more south. But the earth can't move or tilt northward or southward, since celestial and terrestrial latitudes are constant. Then the motion of the sun must be responsible for its variation north and south across lines of latitude, and for the angular difference that accounts for seasonal change. And yet again, if you wish, if the earth moves in orbit around the sun, which is at the center, through the ecliptic or zodiac signs, how is the latitude of each fixed star's rising and setting invariant if the axis of the earth's tilt is invariably fixed to the celestial poles, and the ecliptic is itself slanted 23 degrees and spans a great distance? then the Earth would have to orbit like a wobbling top in order to keep that tilt of the axis fixed to the celestial poles. The only way to account for the seasons would be the Earth's axis tilting to the north and south, or the Earth's orbit straying north or south, to account for the sun's position south of the equator during the winter and the sun's position north of the equator during the summer. Yet how then are the celestial poles and latitudinal lines invariant? For any tilting of the Earth north or south to account for the angular position of the sun producing summer and winter seasons would have to result in a proportional variation in the latitudinal position of the fixed stars and celestial poles. And if the Earth tilted inward along its course through the ecliptic to keep its axis fixed to the celestial poles, the northern hemisphere would always experience summer for one, and also there would be great variations across latitudinal lines of stars near the ecliptic and celestial equator. You answer not. I will give you time by reviewing the problem. At least answer this. According to the heliocentric model presented by Copernicus, which has the Earth moving around the sun, isn't the sun considered as motionless? Galileo, yes. Simplicius of Cilicia. And by that conception, aren't the fixed stars also considered as motionless? Galileo, yes, the fixed stars are also considered as motionless in the Copernican system. Simplicius of Cilicia, then, won't any and all apparent motions of the sun have to be attributed to the motion of the Earth? Again, won't any and all apparent motions of the sun have to be attributed to the motion of the Earth? Galileo, that is the case. Simplicius of Cilicia. And won't any and all apparent motions of the fixed stars have to also be attributed to the motion of the Earth? Galileo, yes, that also. Simplicius of Cilicia. And doesn't the apparent annual motion of the sun west to east through the zodiacal belt include a slight variation north and south of the equatorial line? Galileo, it does. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then, if we attribute to the motion of the Earth the apparent motion of the sun, including its variation north and south of the equatorial line, wouldn't that, since the fixed stars are hypothesized as motionless, also result in an apparent variation north and south of the fixed stars across lines of latitude, relative to and in proportion with the apparent variation of the sun through its annual course, or the Earth's actual motion that results in such phenomena? Again, then if we attribute to the motion of the Earth the apparent motion of the sun, including its variation north and south of the equatorial line, wouldn't that, since the fixed stars are hypothesized as motionless, also result in an apparent variation north and south of the fixed stars, relative to and in proportion with the apparent variation of the sun through its annual course, or the Earth's actual motion that results in that phenomenon? Galileo, I suppose so. Simplicius of Cilicia. But the fixed stars always rise and set over the same latitudinal lines of the Earth. And the North Star at the tail of Ursa Minor remains unmoved. Galileo, yes. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then, according to the argument, we cannot attribute the apparent motion of the sun or its variation north and south of the equator to the motion of the Earth. Then, according to the argument, we cannot attribute the apparent motion of the sun and its variation north and south of the equator to the motion of the earth, or else we would see the same variation north and south across latitudinal lines of the fixed stars. And the northern celestial pole would shift from the tail of Ursa Minor by the same 23 degrees in both directions over the course of a year. Galileo, I follow the argument. Simplicius of Cilicia. Then, Simplicius of Cilicia. That is, since the sun and fixed stars are hypothesized as stationary, since the sun and fixed stars are hypothesized as stationary and motionless, any movement of the earth north and south would necessarily result in an apparent motion of both, which would be seen to vary in relation to latitudinal lines. And the resulting apparent motion of both the sun and fixed stars would have to hold an invariant ratio. Again, since the sun and fixed stars are hypothesized as stationary and motionless, any movement of the earth north or south would necessarily result in the apparent motion of both, which would be seen to vary in relation to latitudinal lines. And the resulting apparent motion of both the sun and the fixed stars would have to hold an invariant ratio. It is then impossible for there to be an apparent motion of the sun northward and southward without an accompanying apparent motion observed amongst the fixed stars, since both the sun and fixed stars are held to be motionless in your view, and any apparent motion of either would be attributed to the movement of the earth. I'll read that again. Since, in your view, the sun and the fixed stars are hypothesized as stationary and motionless, any movement of the earth north and south would necessarily result in the apparent motion of both the sun and the fixed stars, which would be seen to vary in relation to the latitudinal lines, north and south. And the resulting apparent motion of both the sun and the fixed stars would have to hold an invariant ratio. It is then impossible for there to be an apparent motion of the sun northward and southward without an accompanying apparent motion observed amongst the fixed stars, since both the sun and fixed stars are held to be motionless, in your view, and any apparent motion of either of them would be attributed to the motion of the earth. The apparent motion of the sun north and south, although only straying 23 degrees to both sides of the equator across lines of latitude, is not accompanied by a proportional apparent motion of the fixed stars north and south across lines of latitude. Instead, we find the fixed stars rising and setting over the same latitudinal lines of the earth throughout the course of the year, and the northern celestial pole remaining fixed to the tail of Ursa Minor. So also, according to your view, if as we do, we find the fixed stars rising and setting over the same lines of latitude north and south over the earth, we should also find the sun rising and setting over the same lines of latitude north and south. And we should then find no variation of seasons. But we find the sun rising and setting over a great variety of latitudinal lines, straying from the equator by 23 degrees towards the north and by the same amount towards the south, none of which we find of the risings and settings of the fixed stars. Thus, there is no congruence between the apparent motions of the sun and fixed stars, which there would have to be if both were motionless, and any of their apparent motions had to be attributed to the movement of the earth. If the earth tilts or passes north and south of the sun along its course through the zodiacal signs around the sun, there should be a corresponding apparent variation in the fixed stars according to latitudes north and south. The motion of the earth could not, if the sun and fixed stars were motionless. The motion of the earth could not, if the sun and fixed stars were both motionless, be responsible for a change in the sun's position northward and southward across lines of latitude, without also causing an equivalent variation across latitudinal lines north and south of the fixed stars and of the northern celestial pole. Again, the motion of the earth could not, if the sun and fixed stars were both motionless, be responsible for a change in the sun's position northward and southward across lines of latitude, without also causing an equivalent variation across latitudinal lines north and south of the fixed stars and of the northern celestial pole. There is no getting around this. I have set for you a sort of riddle of the Sphinx, or better yet, I have unraveled the riddle of the Sphinx, which consisted in your confounding obscurities. Galileo, this problem is indeed one of those sorts of riddles. For as I said in my dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, that not only none of them ever applied himself to making such observations, but I am not even sure that any of them knew what variation ought to be produced in the fixed stars by the annual movement of the earth. And again, that I do not believe that anyone has set himself the task of observing whether variations which might depend upon an annual movement of the earth are to be perceived in any fixed star at the various seasons of the year. And I added that I doubt whether anyone has very clearly understood just what variations should appear, or among what stars. And I said that I have indeed found authors writing in general terms that the annual motion of the earth should not be admitted because it is improbable that visible changes would not then be seen in the fixed stars. Not having heard anyone go on to say what, in particular, the visible changes ought to be and in what stars, I think it quite reasonable that those who say generally that the fixed stars remain unchanged have not understood and perhaps not even tried to find out the nature of these alterations or what it is they mean ought to be seen. Also, the question is one which Copernicus himself despaired of explaining in such a way as to make it intelligible, as will be seen both from his own admission of its obscurity and from his setting out twice to explain it in two different ways. And without affectation, I admit not having understood his explanation myself. I have, however, given much consideration to the problem, and if you let me gather my thoughts, I will recount to you my solution in preservation of the Copernican worldview.